I want to wish everyone a happy new year and wanted to start the year talking about video games that have captivated me. Video games that have drawn me in to their worlds and games that, have left a lasting impression on my experience of the hobby. And I want to start off here by talking about two games that are the high watermark of captivation for me, and that's Final Fantasy VII and Elder Scrolls Oblivion. And, these two games came around at just the right moment in my life. Final Fantasy VII, I was in high school. When you're in high school, you have all the time in the world. And I got Final Fantasy VII, and it just felt so much bigger, so much more in depth than any RPG I've played before. I love the artwork, I love the story, and I love the fact that the game kind of progressively opened up and gave you a sense of discovery that I think was unrivaled at the time. I remember going into the lunchroom, sitting around with people, and they were just talking about where they had been, what they found, the adventures that they had. And it felt like this game world could accommodate such a variety of experiences. Now, of course, looking back, that might not be the case. It's a fairly linear game. But the 60, 70, 80 hours or whatever it was to finish that game, that time that I invested in Final Fantasy VII, I was in that world. I was thinking about it when the console was off. I couldn't wait to get home to continue my adventure. And it was much the same with Elder Scrolls Oblivion. This is a game that I actually picked up in graduate school. And at that time, was living in my first house. I had the PlayStation 3, the big screen television. And I had heard that, Oblivion was one of those truly next-generation games. So I picked it up out of curiosity, and that turned out to be the right move, or perhaps the wrong move at the time, because I had some responsibilities as far as school went. But I was pulled into that world. It felt bigger than any other RPG I had played, before that point. And so it was kind of that Final Fantasy experience. The fact that this game was, huge and gorgeous and had so much to discover, from the texts that you could read to all the different crypts that you could go into. It was an absolutely magical experience. And again, I found myself sinking 60 plus hours into this game and just loving being in that world. So I look back on these games and say, those are the experiences that really defined me as someone who plays and collects and enjoys video games. And as you get older, it becomes a little bit more difficult to recapture that feeling. And so I'm going to present 5 games today that brought me back to that place, that brought me back to that experience of enjoying and being invested and captivated by video games that Final Fantasy VII and Elder Scrolls gave me. So the first game for me was Yakuza 0. Now, I could have chosen any of the Yakuza games because I have been a huge fan of the series ever since they started releasing, really on the PlayStation 3, although I had played them on the PlayStation 2, but the PlayStation 3 and beyond style of Yakuza game just worked for me. I love the nods to Japanese culture. I enjoyed the mob story and kind of the crazy side quests and variety of mini games. Yakuza is really a series for me. So I could have picked any one, but I went with Yakuza 0 because I think it's the consensus pick for the best Yakuza game. It has one of the better stories. You get to play as both Kiryu and Majima, at the start or near the start of their Yakuza careers. Had a good battle system. Had some of the best boss battles, particularly the Kuze battle in the sewer, just with the music playing and the point at which that occurred in the story. Just a fabulous game all around, and it sort of combined all those things that I just mentioned that I love about Yakuza with 80s nostalgia, with the ability to go back to Japan in the bubble economy and, experience that time period as represented in Kamurocho. So really, I think Yakuza 0, it just offers a lot, and it's a great starting point for the series. My next pick would be the Civilization series, and here I have Civ 6 on the Switch, although primarily I play these games on the PC, but take your pick, Civ 4, 5, or 6. They are all excellent games. And, I'm at a point in my life where maybe I don't have the 60 to 80 hours to invest in an RPG. But as far as being captivated, as far as being absorbed into a game world, I think Civilization does that on a smaller scale. You can start your civilization, basically in the Stone Age and bring it to the Space Age. And just the way the game develops, the choices you make based on the civilization that you choose, the world maps that you choose, it's a very engrossing game, and you can really get into it, particularly, if you are kind of a history buff and you want to almost narrate this alternate cultural development to yourself. It's kind of a strange thing to say, but, you're creating your own story. You're creating your own history each time you play. And though it's not going to last 60 to 80 hours, maybe a playthrough on some of the normal difficulties might be, 8 hours, something like that. It is a wonderful way to be absorbed into a game, and I think, with each iteration, it just gets better and better. So Civilization is one of those games that I can see myself coming back to over the years. So next up we have Fire Pro Wrestling Returns, and, I've talked about this game a lot. This to me is my favorite Fire Pro Wrestling game. I think it's even better than the more recent one released on the PlayStation 4 and PC. It's the last one programmed by the inventor of the series before he unfortunately passed away. And it really is a masterpiece of a game. Now, in its kind of vanilla form, when, if you're just to sort of buy this and pop it in, it's not living up to its full potential. It has a more limited roster, although the characters that are there really do provide for some good matches. But it wasn't until this game came out in 2007, I believe. It wasn't until about 2008, 2009 that the online community surrounding this game really got going. And I modded it and downloaded a ton of really well done created wrestlers. And it was very complicated on how to do this. You needed to kind of be on a forum and then download the files and process them on a PlayStation 3 and bring them over to a PlayStation 2 memory card. It wasn't easy, but once I got, a full roster of 800 characters, representing at that point the entire sort of current world of wrestling and the entire history of wrestling, the game opened up in fascinating and interesting ways. It was just as much fun to play as it was to simulate. And I used to create these Excel spreadsheets with all sorts of different tournaments and either play through or just simulate these tournaments. And the matches, the AI was so expertly programmed in a lot of these cases with these created wrestlers, and the work that went into creating these wrestlers was absolutely amazing. So you could simulate a dream matches throughout the entire history of wrestling. And I found myself constantly going back to this game or constantly thinking about, what matches could I put together. It was a, really singular experience as far as sports gaming goes. Now, next up, and perhaps rather surprisingly, is a visual novel game called Root Letter. And this was one that I picked up because, it was on sale. It might have been about $20. I had, at this point, not really played that many visual novel games, and I wasn't expecting much. But this game was a truly kind of remarkable little game. The basic premise is that you're sort of a 30-something guy, and you find letters that you used to send to your pen pal. And you decide to kind of go back and meet her and see what became of her. And kind of the question is, was she real or not? And if she wasn't real, who was sending you these letters? So it's about going back into your past and kind of digging up and discovering information about this person. And you do it in this little Japanese, I guess, region or town called Shimane, which is really lovingly recreated through some amazing backgrounds and artwork. It's really an engrossing game to play. Now it is, and I say play very loosely because it is kind of a an interactive manga, if you want to call it that. There's not much gameplay there. It's basically a series of interactions, and you have some puzzles to solve. You have some dialogue sequences to kind of get in the right order. But basically, you're reading it, and you're just, I think, absorbed in the lush artwork and the very interesting progression of the story. So I was, completely surprised by this game, and for the 10 or 15 hours, that it takes to get through the story, I was completely engrossed with this world, and so pleasantly surprised at the kind of experience this game offered. And lastly, Persona 5. It was interesting. I picked up the Persona 5 Japanese art book, and I was going through it, and I kind of had like this moment. I had the Persona 5 soundtrack on, and kind of hit me. This game's not that old, but it really is a classic, in my opinion. I think, this really was the perfection of the formula that was put in place in Persona 3 and Persona 4. Everything about those games that I liked was kind of, taken up a level here. The artwork, the music was absolutely top-notch. And instead of playing through kind of bland dungeons, each boss character, when you went into their psyche, each one of those dungeons had a particular layout and a particular theme and set of things that you had to do and solve. The social link system and just the characters were far more interesting, I thought, than in previous games. And, you were in Tokyo, and you had these very stylized representations of different parts of the city. So the time that I spent, in the world of Persona 5 was just, a really, really solid time. And I really enjoyed the other two games, Persona 3, Persona 4. Now, I had played the earlier ones as well, and I've always liked it. But I would say this is the first that drew me in the same way, again, that I was drawn in by the other games in this video, and then particularly the archetypal examples of Final Fantasy VII and Oblivion. And I think this one's going to go down as one of the best, certainly one of the best RPGs of the PlayStation 4 generation. I actually think, looking back 10 years, people are going to say, that was really one of the best games of this past generation. So there you have it, 5 games that captivated me. Obviously, the concept of a captivating game is a highly subjective category. But, these are the 5 that did it for me, that kind of took me back to those hours with Final Fantasy VII and Oblivion, where I was completely enthralled and completely immersed in the game world. But it's going to be different for everyone, so I'd be curious to know, what are some games that captivated you? Let's get a discussion going in the comments.